If we want to make the case that the New Testament is the product of eyewitness testimony, and hence being ready for the courtroom, I think God gave us Christianity courtroom ready. When you're in a courtroom and somebody gets up on the witness stand, the first thing you want to know is this firsthand testimony. And if they say what somebody told them, it becomes hearsay. And of course, you're going to hear an objection from whatever opposing attorney is, depending on who the witness is for. Well, I think we can make the case that the New Testament is the product of eyewitness testimony. It could be recorded, like Luke wasn't an eyewitness to Jesus, but he's recording eyewitness testimony, and that entails the idea that he's living during that time so that they were accessible. Well, that makes the dating of the New Testament pretty important regarding its historical nature. And overall, that's the point. What I'm hoping to do is get you to read the New Testament in the light of it being a biographical history of the life and times and teaching, death and resurrection of Jesus. And of course you have the epistles after Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, and the epistles are letters that draw doctrine, more unfalsifiable teaching, let's say, and that just means that there's more faith involved, based on, though, the provable, as far as we can prove history, the provable history of the New Testament itself. Here again, what we want to talk about now is the dating of the New Testament. If it was written, as the form critics say, as like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins and company would say, if it was written generations after the events, you got a lot of time for legends to creep in. Well, we want to show in a lot of different ways, we want to show that the New Testament could not possibly be legend. You have a corrective effect here. Let me start out by calling it the Jerusalem factor. I asked my classes this, and sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. At any rate, where in what city was Jesus crucified? And most people will know that he was crucified in Jerusalem. Well, in what city then, 40 days later, 50 days later, on the day of Pentecost, did the Apostle Peter stand up and say, God raised Jesus from the dead? Jerusalem. So keep in mind that during the crucifixion, it was at Passover, Jerusalem would have been packed to the gills. So if Jerusalem is double or triple, some would guess more than that, quadruple the population normally. Here's why. You have Passover, which the Jews from all over the world came to Jerusalem, their capital, their home city, for Passover. And then you have the Feast of Pentecost 50 days after, and they just stayed. So between the time of the crucifixion at Passover and the time of the Feast of Pentecost, when Peter stands up, you've still got a packed city. Well, the factor is this: you've got built-in hundreds of thousands, so to speak, of eyewitnesses who would have known about the crucifixion of Jesus. I'll give you a great example. On the road to Emmaus, the disciples who had left Jerusalem, they were discouraged, they were leaving after the resurrection. Luke records in Luke 24, if you want to read it. They record Jesus coming among them and saying, what are you talking about? What's going on? And they ask him, haven't you been in Jerusalem or just here in the last couple of days? Don't you know what's happened? Well, the implication is everybody knows that the one that we thought was the Messiah, Jesus, was crucified. And they said that they didn't know it was Jesus. They said, and I don't know why that happened, that's something that God did, I presume. But their point is, we thought he was the Messiah, he did miracles, he did great deeds, and then they crucified him, so I guess he's not. The point is, it's public knowledge. Everybody knows Jesus is crucified. So you have a living, built-in eyewitness program, if you will, witness protection, you might call it, of the crucifixion. Now 50 days later, in the same place with the same people involved, Peter gets up and says, God raised him from the dead. Now, several things come into play here. If Jesus had not been buried in a tomb so that could be falsifiable, if he's not in the tomb anymore, if he's raised from the dead, he can't be in the tomb. If there is no tomb, nobody knows for sure one way or the other. But of course, the New Testament records he's buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and that is considered to be historical knowledge. Of course, the resurrection you wouldn't say is historical knowledge, it's more by faith, but it's the only real conclusion for the events that took place. But my point here is this: you have all these eyewitnesses that are built-in correctives. If Jesus wasn't crucified, which some don't think he was, there are a few who think he didn't even exist. If he wasn't crucified, nobody would have believed he was risen from the dead. if the tomb was not empty. Even the disciples would not have believed he was raised from the dead. Almost all historians agree that Jesus was a real person. He was crucified on the Passover, and then 50 days later, Peter stood up and said God raised him from the dead. Now, my point is this. It's so critical. Here we've said all along that Christianity is built on historical events. The fact that it is written, that the New Testament is written during the living memory of the people who were a part of those events, is absolutely critical. So dating the New Testament is very important. You have the Jerusalem factor, what I'm calling that, which is simply a corrective. You can't say God raised Jesus from the dead if there's no empty tomb. And they're within, where they are is virtually the same spot where he's buried. He's very close to the place where Jesus is buried. If you're there and you're hearing all this and you knew Jesus was crucified, and now here's somebody telling you he's raised from the dead, are you going to go look at the tomb? Of course. We don't know how many did, there's not recorded, but you can be sure that thousands of people went to see if the tomb was empty. If it had not been empty, you and I would have never heard of Jesus 2,000 years later. But here's the closing point. Here's a faith, a religious tradition, if you want to call it that begins 2,000 years ago with the exact same message that we believe today. It has lasted over these centuries. If it started out as legends and myths and fables, you would have seen a lot of change over the years. They had to change to get in the Bible, according to some. But if this is the original, the autograph, so to speak, message, if this is the basis for Christianity from the beginning, and that same message has a track record of being passed down after it is established by eyewitnesses, we've got something to hold on to. I hope that you will read the New Testament with the idea that perhaps it is accurate biographical history of the life and death of Jesus Christ.